My supercharger whined as it pumped pressurized air into my engine's intake manifold, louder than the rapid thumping of my heart. I was surprised that my heart could even beat in its current condition. It was getting hard to see through the tears pouring from my eyes. I figured I should slow down before I rolled the only thing in this world that I could really call my own. As the needle on my speedometer moved back into the readable zone, I heard the sirens again. I guess I thought the cops would have given up when I passed 140 miles per hour. No such luck. Screw it, I thought. I pulled over to the side of the road, letting them take me to jail. Maybe some time in the pokey would help me get away from the nightmare that my life had become. The cop pulled up beside me. Strangely enough, he didn't pull out his gun. He just came over to the car. "Jesus, Grant," he spat. "Do you know how fast you were going?" It was Fred Lively. Fred and I had grown up together. We'd been friends for most of our lives until he became a cop. I wondered how the friendship would fare now that I'd become a notorious speeder. I guess I should say felonious speeder because in some states, including mine, driving over 150 miles per hour on a public road is a felony. "What's wrong?" he asked. Fred had been at the hospital earlier. When I got there, it was hard to believe, given how I felt or looked right now, that today had started as the happiest day of my life so far. I'd been at the hospital all night after the birth of my first daughter, Brandy, depending on how you wanted to measure it. They'd sent me home last night because I'd been there all day and all night. There had been complications with the birth, nothing life-threatening or life-altering, just a few problems. They said the problems might have been brought about by the fact that my wife, Bonnie, is over 35. It turned out that Brandy, our baby, had an inguinal hernia. It wasn't really serious, but it did require surgery. Though surgery on a newborn sounds really scary, it happens more often than people believe. This was especially true now since more babies were being born to older mothers, older being anything over 30, and my wife was definitely over 30. She's 36 actually, and she's never been the healthiest person I know, but I love her like there's no tomorrow. I got up and dressed for the occasion in a t-shirt I'd made to show my pride. Now, when I looked down at it, I realized that it just showed my gullibility and stupidity. The shirt was the same bright yellow as my Camaro. It had a giant smiley face on it with its tongue sticking out. Under the smiley face and on the back the shirt read, "My name is Daddy." Since I was kind of a conservative guy, I'd never normally wear anything that bright. Even the color of my car was unusual for me. I'd been looking for a black Camaro when I bought it, but after tests driving the car I just couldn't give it back. Anyway, as I sat there in my car crying, I realized that not the shirt, was the joke. I was the only thing around here for anyone to laugh at. I remembered when my youngest was born a few years ago. Said Fred, I realized that I was locked in for at least 18 more years. I had 18 years of paying for everything and putting myself last. 18 more years of putting my dreams into things that I wanted to do second. I went a little bit crazy. He looked at me as if he knew what I was going through. I actually went into a depression and had to see a shrink, he said. Things between Grace and I weren't the best back then either. I was going through the male version of postpartum depression. They don't even have a name for it, but a lot of guys get it. I just don't understand you having it though. You've been looking forward to this baby for a long time. You and Bonnie are the two most in love people I've ever come across. I guess it can hit anyone though, can't it? I didn't say anything. I just wiped my eyes. It was embarrassing to let another man see me with tears on my face. Bonnie is pretty broken up about you leaving the hospital like that, he offered. Why don't I escort you back there? Fred, I just want to go home and get myself together, I said. If you'll allow me to, I just want to go home and think. I promise to drive under the speed limit. You can even escort me there if you want. No need for that, Grant, he said. I'll see you later. Drive safely. He put those weird mirror sunglasses that only cops wear back on, got back into his squad car, and pulled back into traffic. He turned around and went back in the direction of the hospital. I drove up my driveway and stopped my car. I went into the house I had shared with Bonnie and her two girls for the past 11 years. I was 23 and Bonnie was 25 when we moved in. I'd known Bonnie and Franklin for 11 years. We were almost total opposites, but we seemed to fit together perfectly. Even at this moment, I kept waiting for her to come into the house and tell me that everything was going to be fine, but everything wasn't going to be fine. Everything was messed up, things were never going to be fine again. I thought about grabbing a beer and sitting down on my deck, but I'm just not like that. I need movement to think. Sitting down and relaxing was Bonnie's idea of how to think. I could only remain still with her near me. I went upstairs into the bedroom then until this moment we shared. I grabbed a pair of running shorts, changed into them, and put on a different t-shirt. I threw the yellow one in the trash. I grabbed my iPod and headed out to run the trails behind our house. Let's see the story from Bonnie's side. My name is Bonnie Martin and I feel empty. I also feel very lonely, and neither of those feelings would make any sense to anyone who saw me right now. My guess is that the throngs of family, friends, and other well-wishers surrounding me think that I'm tired or sore from giving birth yesterday. Only my very closest friends and family members think they know why I'm upset, and they are partially correct. They realize that my unhappiness has something to do with the fact that my husband and the love of my life left the hospital unexpectedly. My dad tried to make me feel better by telling me that the birth of a child is a traumatic experience for the father too. He told me that when I was born, he was just overwhelmed and wanted to run out of the hospital and never come back. My dad was smiling as he told me that Grant would be back soon. He just needed some time to get himself together. Grant is pretty tough, said Daddy. When you were born, I fainted in the delivery room. Grant was there to cut baby's umbilical cord. You just watch. He'll be back here any second. Brandy, my youngest daughter, was born yesterday. We named her Brandy because it was the perfect combination of both of our names without being one of those weird-sounding names they're giving kids these days. I had two other daughters, Marie, who was 14, and Tara, who was 8. Marie was the result of a previous relationship I had before I met Grant. I'd gone a little bit crazy and ended up pregnant. The guy I was with at the time took off so fast it seemed like time went backward in his wake. Marie was 3 years old when I met Grant, but she couldn't remember a time before he was in our lives. As far as she knew, he was her daddy, and no one could ever tell her any different, not that Grant would ever let anyone tell her anything different either. Even when Tara came along, there was always a special bond between Grant and Marie. My daughter thought the sun shone out of her daddy's palm. When Grant and I got married, it was the happiest day of all our lives. Even the wedding was a special day not just for Grant and me, but for the three of us. I guess you're imagining a wonderful scene with Marie as the flower girl. Nope. Marie said that she wanted to get married too, so she stood there in front of the preacher with us, holding onto Grant's hand tightly. When we said our I do, there she was yelling me too. When Grant gave me the traditional first kiss before we were done, there she was, tugging on Grant's pant leg and asking for her turn. Grant, to the delight of our friends and family, picked her up and gave her a peck on the cheek. I knew then that I loved that man more than anything else on the planet. I knew already that I loved him and wanted to spend the rest of my life with him. After all, that's what marriage means, right? But at that moment, all of the feelings I previously had for him were simply eclipsed. It was as if my heart and soul just opened up and blended with him. Grant, though not involved in Marie's conception, was her father to a greater degree than anyone else could ever claim. We had no problems. We just settled into an idyllic life. We didn't argue and we were financially well off. Everything was wine and roses. Our intimate life and our life in general had been just great. There were times when I made Grant stay home from work just so we could be more intimate, even up until 9 months ago when I got pregnant. We had hooky-nooky, as we called it, at least once a month, and that was on top of our already robust intimate life. The only problem we had was that I didn't get pregnant when I wanted to. It wasn't just about intimate. I wanted to. I needed to feel Grant's seed growing inside of me and making a little being that was the combination of our genes. When I had Marie, the whole pregnancy was awful. First, I was such a disappointment to my parents. They never expected me to be the daughter who got pregnant without being married. They let me live with them and helped out, but the shame on their faces never went away. Don't get me wrong, they love all of my girls now, but it was me they were disappointed in. Now, married to Grant, I wanted us to share a child and have that experience together. We went to doctors and found out the awful news. We were both extremely healthy, but Grant had a low male hormones count. It wouldn't be impossible for me to get pregnant, but it would take a lot of luck. So we tried for another year or so and then adopted Tara. Tara was only 10 days old when she came home to live with us. Grant and I shared all of the joys and pains of raising another child, and he got to see this one from the beginning. That was 8 years ago, and I look back on it with fond memories. I love both of my girls and Grant as much as the air I breathe. I couldn't live without him. As a gift to him and our family, I still wanted to go through the pregnancy experience again. I guess I wanted to see life the way it was for those pregnant women on TV, lying there in bed while the man they love comes over to rub their stomach and feel their child growing inside of them. I wanted us to go to birthing classes and pick out names together. I wanted to walk around town with my belly just bulging and have everyone who looked at us know that he had put a baby inside of me. Maybe it was my memory of how bad and ashamed I'd been during the time I was pregnant with Marie. Maybe it was the fact that with Tara, we had shared the experience as I wanted, but only the part after she was born. To me, that was only half of what I wanted. I'd have 100 babies with Grant if he wanted. I'd stay pregnant all the time. Maybe I was just a little bit crazy. In retrospect, I now see that I wasn't just a little bit crazy. I was a lot selfish. I told my mom that I was tired and wanted to get some sleep. She started shooting people out of the room. After they were gone, I reached over to the table beside the bed and felt waves of pain so severe that I almost bled out. As I gasped in pain, my mother came back and slapped my hand. "Bonnie, don't you want to go home?" She snapped at me. "If you tear your stitches, Brandy may go home before you do." "What are you reaching for?" she asked. "My phone," I said. "I need to call Grant." She didn't say anything. She just handed me the phone. I hit the one key and my BlackBerry dialed Grant's iPhone. Our phones were set up so they automatically connected. We each had our own ringtone on the other's phone to let us know when we were calling, so there was no need to look at the screen. Even if Grant was screening his calls, my ringtone let him know it was me. The phone rang and on the second ring it went to voicemail. That told me exactly how upset Grant was with me. Under normal circumstances, Grant's phone only went to voicemail after the fourth ring. That meant Grant had manually shifted my call to voicemail to blow me off. He didn't want to talk to me. I pretended to talk to him to throw my mother off the track. I didn't want her to know that there was something wrong with us. She watched, smiling, and when I hung up the phone, kissed me on the forehead and told me to go to sleep. As she turned and left the room, she looked back at me. "Why didn't Grant come back here?" she asked. My mother was part of Grant's fan club too. He's not feeling well," I said. And the nurse probably told him that since Brandy had a few complications with her birth, he didn't want to risk making her sick. "Well, that's silly," said my mom. "Why?" I asked. "I think it's great that he already wants to be careful with his newest daughter." "Remember, Brandy had to have that surgery last night," began my mom. "Grant gave blood, and he told the doctor to make sure that his blood only went to his daughter. If being around him could make her sick, surely her getting his blood could." I went into shock at my mother's words. I didn't know how truthful her statement was. I wasn't sure that getting blood from someone with a cold could give you a cold or anything like that, but at that moment I realized that there was a chance that my whole house of cards was about to come tumbling down. "In fact," continued my mother, "it was after Grant spoke to the doctor again this morning that he went running out of here. I had to get my mother out of the room before I broke down and started bawling. 'Mom, could you send Brenda in on her way out?' I said. 'I really need to talk to her about something.' My mother just looked puzzled. I'm sure she knew that something was going on, but she just nodded her head and walked out of the room. Meanwhile, Grant had started his running. I had to be very careful as I ran in the mental and emotional state I was in. I wasn't really paying much attention to where I was going or the ground I was running on. Running trails is different from running on a track or on the roads. The surface changes and differs every time you run on it. You have to worry about rain far more. It's not just a case of getting wet. The rain can destabilize your running surface very easily. Anyway, I trucked along at a good pace, trying to lose myself and my problems in the music and the run. I always set my iPod to shuffle. That way, I can just let iTunes fill it up with a random selection of music, and it will play the songs at random as well. It's like having a different playlist every time I run. My music was as random as the ground I ran over. Somehow, though, especially that day, it made me realize that there are no accidents. Perhaps everything we do has already been planned. Maybe there is a divine consciousness or a supreme being sitting on a cloud up there, laughing at me. He or she had probably decided that I'd had enough good luck in my life, so it was time to turn things on me. Somehow, in all of that randomness, my iPod managed to play the most fitting song. Amy Lee, the earthbound goth goddess of depression, sang about my particular relationship. Actually, I was sure that Amy Lee had never heard of me, but it sure as hell felt that way. Nearly all of Evanescence's songs are dreary, but this one seemed to fit my particular depression to a T. I wanted you to be with me for so long, I don't even know why now, sang Amy Lee over a cacophony of guitars and drums. The song Forever Gone, Forever You hit home all too painfully. From the very first second that I'd met Bonnie, I loved her and wanted to spend the rest of my life with her. But at that moment, not only were we over, but I had trouble understanding why I'd ever loved her in the first place. She'd been the one who doubted us, perhaps because she'd already been burned once. She just didn't want to give me a chance. It took 2 weeks of constantly bothering her to get her to go out with me. 2 minutes into our first date, she tripped. I caught her and we knew that we'd never be apart again. Of course, she claims that she was just playing hard to get. I've often told her that she almost didn't get me. I'd been on the verge of giving up on her and dating someone else. As I've mentioned before, we were total opposites. I'd been really popular all through high school and college. I played sports and hung out with a crowd that liked to party. I'd always had a selection of girls to go out with and to have intimate with, but I made it a point not to ever settle down with one girl. I simply wanted to have fun. I wasn't ready or willing to be tied down to a relationship with any one woman. There were simply too many things I'd have to give up if I was tied down. There had been lots of girls who thought they could trap me, but not one succeeded. They'd all tried it, the cheerleaders, the girls next door, the artists, the hot girls, the models, the tight girls, the booty girls, the nerds. They'd all had their shots and they'd all failed. I knew that someday, maybe when I was 50, I'd settle down, but not much before then. It was like that song in one of those Elvis movies my grandma used to make me watch with her, I got a lot of livin' to do. Bonnie, on the other hand, was even more messed up in the head than I was. Where I was afraid or just unwilling to commit to anything, she never even went to college. She joined a convent right out of high school to become a nun. She trained and served until she was 23 or 24 before taking her final vows. She decided to take another look at the world outside of the convent. She took a 3-month leave of absence and rented a small apartment. Her life was nowhere near the way she wanted it to be. That was when she moved back in with her parents. After Marie was born, she took a waitress job to support herself and Marie, then swore off men for life. That's why it was so hard for me to get her to go out with me. At that point in her life, Bonnie was dedicated to giving Marie the best life she could. She had no room in her life for love, romance, and especially not men. Our first date was not some lavish, expensive escapade that cost thousands of dollars. I took her to an early movie, and then we went to get ice cream afterward. I think what sealed the deal for me was when she accidentally slipped and I caught her. It caused our faces to come into close proximity and our eyes locked. For me, it was magical. I saw my future with her and knew then that she was the woman I could commit to. She's often told me similar things. The one I love most sounds really corny, but she said that she saw her kids in my eyes. Yep, kids plural. At the time I had none and she only had one. Meeting Marie for the first time was scary. I knew that any future I had with Bonnie depended on Marie. We were supposed to be going to the park for that first date, but Bonnie still wanted to impress me. Perhaps this is a good point to mention that Bonnie isn't some waif-thin supermodel type with 5-foot-long legs. Bonnie is very beautiful, but she's a bit on the chunky side. She's not fat or huge, she's just not thin. She has big legs, a big butt, and huge boobs. I wouldn't change her for all the money in the world. I love snuggling up to her big, soft hips when we sleep, and waking up with one of her legs draped over me always makes my morning. Anyway, back to the date. I was more nervous about meeting Marie than I was about meeting Bonnie's parents. After Bonnie introduced us, I smiled as the little girl came over and looked at me. She burst out into a smile and started talking rapidly. "Hi, my name is Marie. I'm 3," she said, all in one burst of words. She paused and held up 4 fingers to show me she was 3. Do you know how to play any games? How about jacks? I love to play jacks, but I'm not very good at it, she said. I got some of it. I remember that the girls in my neighborhood used to play jacks, but I had never tried. I shrugged my shoulders and she started up again. Okay, don't worry about it. I'll teach you, okay? She ran out of the room quickly. Bonnie must have heard my footsteps and ran into the living room half-dressed. Her blouse was still open. For the first time, I got a look at her bra-covered breasts. I was frozen in place. What snapped me out of it was the look of anger on her face. What did you do to her? She snapped. Maybe you should just go. This isn't going to work out. I was so confused that I didn't know what to do. On one hand, I hadn't done anything to the little girl. I didn't really like kids, but I thought this one was adorable. I actually wanted to be around her. On the other hand, Bonnie's anger was causing her to breathe heavily, and those heaving breaths were taking their toll on me. I opened the door and got ready to leave. I'm really sorry you feel that way, I said. I thought we had something special. I did too, she said. Suddenly, Marie reappeared carrying a small case. She looked at me and then back at her mother. Where are you going? She asked me. I thought we were going to play jacks. I have to teach you how. You can't play jacks without jacks. She grabbed my hand and pulled me back inside the door, then looked at her mother. Mommy, did you make him go home? No, honey. I want him to stay too, said Bonnie. She then noticed that her shirt was unbuttoned and started fastening it. From then on, the 3 of us were inseparable. And by the 3 of us, I didn't mean me and her breasts. We got married and a few years later, adopted another baby girl. I loved Bonnie more every day and I loved my girls too. I didn't think that my life could possibly get any better until roughly 9 months ago when Bonnie told me that she was pregnant. The astronauts on the International Space Station probably heard us screaming that day. Not that we loved our girls any less. But this was something that we both really wanted and thought we'd have to do without. I knew Bonnie had strong feelings about how she thought a pregnancy should go. I was worried that I wouldn't be able to live up to her expectations. For many women, their dream romantic fantasy revolves around poetry, a trip to Paris, or going out to an elegant affair. For Bonnie, the most romantic, erotic, and sensual thing 2 people can do is have a baby together. You hear a lot about the saying that when 2 people are in love, their souls blend. For Bonnie, the ultimate expression of love was having a baby with the man she loved. She was into the whole belly rubbing, running out in the middle of the night for pickles and ice cream trips. Each day she got bigger and happier. She also got hornier if that was even possible. I also had to reassure her that the few pounds she'd gained only made her more attractive to me. I had to develop a kind of radar for exactly what she needed to hear and when she needed to hear it. As I said yesterday, it should have been the happiest moment of my life, other than when Bonnie first told me that she loved me or the day she agreed to marry me. But all of the happiness yesterday brought with silly t-shirts and me handing out bubble-gum cigars to everyone I met paled in comparison to the despair I felt when an overworked doctor said those 3 terrible words. I had, as mentioned earlier, arrived at the hospital very early after waking up from my 2 hours of sleep, taking a quick shower, and putting on jeans with my ridiculous t-shirt. When I got to the hospital, I asked the doctor if I needed to give any more blood. He told me that everything was fine, but if they needed any more blood, it would be better if it came from the baby's mother or her biological father. Her biological father. I thought. What the hell was I? Seeing my reaction, the doctor knew he had screwed up. He apologized several times, realizing he might have just gotten himself a lawsuit. The HIPAA laws are very strict when it comes to patient confidentiality. Suddenly the room felt a lot smaller and I had trouble breathing. I was overwhelmed by jumbled thoughts. Why wasn't I the baby's biological father? Was I supposed to be? I wasn't Marie's biological dad, nor was I Tara's biological dad. So, was I supposed to be Bryce? Marie wasn't mine. Tara wasn't mine. Now it turned out that Brandy wasn't mine, and obviously when it came right down to it, Bonnie wasn't mine either. She had definitely been intimate with someone else and she knew it. After 11 years together, she knew how I felt about her, so I was sure she understood what this would do to me. She probably also knew that Brandy wasn't mine, so she had, besides cheating on me, set out to purposefully deceive me. None of them were mine. Did I have anything that was? I needed to get out and get some air. I pushed brusquely past a bunch of our friends who wanted to wish me well. Though it wasn't their fault, I just didn't have the patience to deal with them right then. I needed to get out of that room before the walls closing in on me crushed me. The nurse told me that my wife had just awakened and had asked for me. At the same time, several of our friends and Bonnie's sister Brenda had seen that stupid shirt and started calling me Daddy. It was like I was trapped in a room full of people calling me Daddy sarcastically and laughing at me. I really wasn't anyone's daddy. I was just a joke. Everywhere I looked, another smiling face called me Daddy. It was like an episode of Twilight Zone. Then the nurse stepped up and in a very insistent voice said, "Daddy, your wife wants to see you right now. Very badly. She said she needs a kiss." "Hey, you better not go," someone said. That's what started this whole thing in the first place. Daddy, I think I must have been temporarily nuts because everything they said seemed to be coming at me in slow motion. Their voices sounded distorted and unnaturally deep, and everything they said, no matter how innocent, dripped with sarcasm. "Daddy, Daddy, your wife wants to see you. Daddy, no more kisses for you, Daddy." These were my family and friends, but suddenly I hated every goddamn one of them. If I could have pushed a button and set off a bomb at that moment, that hospital would be a smoking crater in the middle of the city. Screw her. I screamed at the top of my lungs. Everyone in the room stopped and stared at me. Except for the beeping of machines and computers, there was abject silence. Then, after a few moments, someone getting over their shock said, "You already did. That's why we're here." The next thing I remember was being in the parking lot, starting my car, and the sound of my tires shredding as I peeled out of there, lost in my thoughts. Back on the trails, I ran faster and faster over the uneven ground, with only Amy Lee's depressing wail as my companion. Back at the hospital, Brenda Franklin walked into the room and stood beside her sister's bed. On the surface, the two sisters couldn't have been more different. Beneath the surface, the differences were even greater. Brought up with similar values, one would expect the sisters to share similar personalities and values, but they didn't. While Bonnie entered the convent in her 20s, Brenda became a model. Bonnie was either voluptuous or chunky. Depending on how generous you were, Brenda was very svelte, as her career dictated. Bonnie could go shopping, and most people wouldn't remember seeing her. Men's heads snapped nearly off their necks trying to catch a glimpse of Brenda. Bonnie had gone intimate crazy after leaving the convent. Brenda had done her experimenting during her college years and looked at intimacy as just another bodily function. She neither avoided it nor pursued it aggressively. While she had no scruples against occasionally putting out to get a better assignment, the times she'd done it were few and far between. Bonnie loved children and wanted as many as she could have. Brenda had gotten her tubes tight when she turned 22. She didn't want to risk her career or livelihood with an unwanted pregnancy. Her sister's mishap had been extremely telling for her. Bonnie loved her husband more than she could ever put into words. Brenda had never felt anything resembling what Bonnie talked about. Bonnie was sure that Brenda just needed to meet the right man under the right circumstances. She went out of her way to try and fix her sister up. Sometimes Brenda very gently rebuffed her sister's attempts at matchmaking, knowing that when she was ready, the right man would come around. Brenda looked down at her sister in the hospital bed. She shook her head. All the talk about new mothers looking radiant was pure bullshit. Bonnie looked like hell, her hair was all over the place, she didn't have any makeup on, and she looked like she was about to cry at any moment. There were a couple of tubes pumping God knows what combination of chemicals into her veins. There was no way that Brenda would ever go through all of that just to bring another mouth to feed into the world. Her sister, even after having the baby, had been